Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. I want to bring your attention to a story that may not dominate the headlines of mainstream media, but carries enormous weight for the future of United States foreign policy, the trajectory of global economics, and the delicate but undeniable shift in the balance of world power. The headline reads, China warns U.S. on Venezuela power shift exposed. At first glance, this may sound like another diplomatic exchange, another scuffle in the endless tug-of-war of international politics. But if you look deeper, it is much, much more than that. This story is not simply about Venezuela, nor is it only about China's interest in oil. It is about the unraveling of a world order that has defined international relations for over a century. For decades, the United States has treated Latin America as its so-called backyard. The region was considered an uncontested sphere of influence, protected and enforced under the Monroe Doctrine and its later variations. Venezuela in particular has always been a focal point. Why? Not simply because of its politics, but because it holds some of the largest proven oil reserves on Earth. The nation's vast energy wealth has made it both strategically important and persistently targeted. Washington has intervened, sanctioned, destabilized, and sought regime change in Venezuela repeatedly. And every time, the justification was framed in noble language, restoring democracy, defending human rights, protecting freedom. But let's strip away the rhetoric and look at the raw truth. This has always been about control of resources, markets, and influence. Now, a new actor has entered the stage with determination: China. Beijing has not only invested billions into Venezuela's infrastructure, oil sector, and trade, but has also issued a direct warning to Washington: stay out of Venezuela's internal political transitions. Why would China take such a bold step? Because for Beijing, Venezuela is not just another country. It is a strategic partner, a foothold in Latin America, and a symbol of a reshaped global order. This is what shakes the American establishment. For the first time in modern history, a rising power is openly contesting United States dominance in a region Washington has long considered untouchable. Why does this matter so much? Because this confrontation is not only about Venezuela. It is about the larger story of the decline of unilateral American hegemony. The days when the United States could dictate terms to smaller nations with little to no pushback are coming to an end. China's involvement in Venezuela is a signal, a clear, deliberate, and defiant message. The era of American monopoly is over. You cannot act unilaterally anymore. For Washington, this is an uncomfortable truth rarely admitted in public. The obsession with Venezuela has never been about democracy or liberty. It's always been about oil contracts, about who controls supply lines, and honestly, who gets to write the rules of the global economy. This is why China's warning is so powerful. It's not just words, it's a declaration that U.S. dominance has limits. And, this really should be a wake-up call to the American people. Let us pause and ask the critical question. Why is the U.S. spending billions of taxpayer dollars on interventions, sanctions, and power games in countries thousands of miles away, while working families in America are struggling with jobs, healthcare, housing, and education? Why are elites in Washington gambling with global conflicts instead of rebuilding at home? When you hear the phrase, China warns the U.S., what do you think of? Do you imagine a looming military conflict? Or do you see the contours of economic rivalry? The truth is, it's both. China and the U.S. are locked in a competition that spans trade, technology, energy, and yes, even military positioning. The danger is that Washington, unwilling to recognize limits, may escalate this rivalry into open confrontation, risking global war while America itself is plagued by economic decay, crumbling infrastructure, and internal division. So, Latin America was often called Washington's backyard. For most of the 20th century, Latin America was treated as Washington's exclusive domain. Any government that tried to step outside U.S. influence, whether through nationalizing resources or seeking ties with other powers, faced the full weight of American pressure. The list of interventions is long: coups in Guatemala, Chile, Brazil, and more. Sanctions on Cuba, direct invasions in Grenada and Panama. The logic was clear. No outside power should have influence in the region, period. But times have changed. In recent years, China has quietly and steadily expanded its presence in Latin America. Billions in trade, infrastructure projects, technology deals, and energy investments have built lasting relationships. And with Venezuela, China is not simply another investor. It has become a stakeholder in the country's future. That is why the warning to Washington matters so much. It was not just a diplomatic protest, it was a declaration that the old rules no longer apply. Let us be very clear. This is not only about Venezuela. This is a direct challenge to decades of American dominance in the Western Hemisphere. When China steps into Venezuela, it is not merely about oil rigs, pipelines, or trade contracts. It is a symbolic act that says, you no longer have a monopoly here, we are rewriting the rules. For U.S. policymakers still clinging to the illusion of uncontested power, this is disruptive, unsettling, and dangerous. Think about the irony here. For years, Washington has used the language of democracy to justify intervention in Venezuela. Yet China, without sending troops or staging coups, is achieving influence through investments, loans, and partnerships. In other words, where the United States relied on coercion, China is using economics. And honestly, it is working. Yes, Venezuela's oil is definitely a major factor. But for China, this is not only about securing energy supplies. This is about challenging United States power right at its doorstep. Just as Washington once sought to encircle China with military alliances in Asia, China is now planting a flag in Latin America. The symbolism here cannot be ignored. Beijing is showing the world that it can contest American dominance even in the Western Hemisphere. That is not just strategy, it is a statement. For the United States, this creates an impossible dilemma. Ignore China's advance, and America looks weak. Push back and risk a costly geopolitical showdown it simply cannot afford. This is why Venezuela has become so much bigger than it appears on the surface. China's warning to Washington is not an isolated incident. It is, part of a larger, undeniable trend. Multipolarity is rising. The United States is no longer the sole superpower. Nations like China, Russia, India, and various regional alliances are, reshaping global influence. Economic power is shifting. The U.S. dollar remains strong, but alternatives are emerging, from UN-based oil contracts to digital currencies and regional trade agreements that bypass American control. The legitimacy of intervention is collapsing. After decades of wars in the Middle East, failed interventions, and broken promises of democracy, Washington's credibility is eroding. In this context, Venezuela is not just a country in crisis. It is honestly a battleground in the global struggle over the future of power. We must ask ourselves, what do endless sanctions, interventions, and power struggles actually achieve for ordinary Americans? While Washington elites play chess with other nations' futures, millions of Americans struggle to pay rent, afford healthcare, or send their children to college. The billions spent trying to control Venezuela or any other nation could rebuild infrastructure, create jobs, and restore dignity at home. The tragedy is that Washington's ruling class would rather pursue global dominance than fix the decay happening on Main Street. China's warning to the United States over Venezuela is not just another headline. Honestly, it is a signal of a world transformed. The uncontested dominance of the United States is slipping away, and new powers are boldly asserting themselves, even in America's once untouchable backyard. This is not only about oil, or Venezuela, or Latin America. It is about the end of an era, and really, the birth of something new, a world where no single nation can dictate the rules. And here is the truth we must all confront, unless America learns to adapt, focusing on rebuilding its own society instead of chasing dominance abroad. It will face a future where its power erodes further. Its people grow more disillusioned, and its leaders find themselves powerless against the tide of history. So when you hear the phrase China warns United States on Venezuela, do not dismiss it as another diplomatic quarrel. See it for what it truly is. A warning that the balance of power has shifted, that the monopoly of influence is broken, and that the 21st century will not be written by one nation alone. The question is, will America wake up in time, or will it cling to the past even as the future passes it by?